We have now come to the last session of Inspire 23. Very, very honored to invite on stage. He's the chairman of the Peebles company, and it's none other than Don Peebles himself, to talk about strategies for maximizing diversity and securing access to capital. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Well done. Okay, so everybody's having a nice afternoon in Miami, and probably everybody's out on the beach, except it's a little windy today, right? Well, thank you, Michelle. We just met, and she was able to handle a good introduction, and it's not often that I receive any kind of introduction in Miami Beach, especially as a real estate developer. Real estate developers are not very popular. I was watching, actually, the other night, I was watching this kind of rerun network of 1970s sitcoms. Norman Mailer just passed away, and he did a series of them all in the family, and one of them was the Jeffersons. And I'm watching, and they start talking about how bad the landlord is. And I'm like, wow, even back then, real estate developers were not popular. But we aren't by ourselves. And I had spoken to a good friend of mine the other day who's a lawyer, represents our company a bit, and I was telling him I got this invitation to speak about luxury hotels, and it's a space I think I know a little bit about. But I was surprised to get the invitation because normally developers are not very popular. And he told me that developers were more disliked than lawyers. And so that reminds me of a story about a developer who died. So I'm going to share it with you so we can lighten up things a little bit. This is a story about a developer who dies, and he reports to the pearly gates, and he's greeted by St. Peter. St. Peter checks his dossier, and the developer is not on the list. So the developer reports to the gates of hell. Satan welcomes him with open arms. And after about 3 months in hell, the developer gets uncomfortable with his surroundings. So he starts making some improvements. First line of business is some air conditioning. Then he installs flushing toilets. Then he installs an escalator. And so one day, Satan's kicked back by the fireside, and the phone rings, and it's God. And he says, so how's it going down there in hell? So it's actually not too bad. Things are going pretty well. We've got air conditioning, we've got flushing toilets, we've got escalators. Who knows what this developer is going to come up with next? God said, you got a developer down there, that's a mistake. You got to send him up here immediately. And God says, no way. Satan says, no way, I'm going to keep him. I like having a developer on staff. And God said, if you don't send him up immediately, I'm going to sue. And Satan starts laughing euphorically and says, oh yeah, well, where are you going to get the lawyers? So there, my friend really understands that we are not as unpopular as lawyers. So I want to talk a bit about a couple of issues that are important to me. And since we have a smaller audience, I want to do it a little more flexible. So I want to tell you about things that are important to me. So I came down here, in fact, similar to many other people who've come down here. I came to Miami for the sun and the beautiful weather and so forth. And so all year long, people who are down here in Miami, we get to enjoy relatively wonderful weather. And today's considered a bad day because it's got a little overcast and wind. But overall, we enjoy the wonderful weather down here, especially in the winter, and people up north and dealing with the snow and so forth. But we're not the only ones who like this weather. 750,000 people have moved to Florida since 2020 during the pandemic. So that is a great migration of people moving from the Northeast and the Midwest down to South Florida and other more friendly climates for business and weather in general. Miami, for example, not only has Miami had people come, but a considerable amount of money has come to Miami. For example, Miami's real estate has gone up 87% since 2020. The GDP for the region has grown to $11.1 billion, which is 6% of our GDP for the entire state. Miami's hospitality market has grown significantly. Since 2019, domestic visitors have gone up over 40%. The average daily room rate in Miami has risen also to $223 per night, which is a 23% increase since COVID. So Miami has become a global gateway city. It has emerged as the city of the moment and the city of the future. And I look at the place that I spend a lot of my time in, New York, as a city of the past. I see New York as a city of the present fading into the past, and unless it reinvents itself, it will become a city of the past, along with Los Angeles, another place I do a lot of business as well. So personally, I've loved Miami for several decades, long before the pandemic. A serendipitous trip brought me down to South Beach in the 1990s. Literally, it changed my life. I came down here to Miami with my wife for a break in the fall of 1995 to take a break from Washington, D.C., where my company was headquartered. And I came down to relax, and my wife and I liked it. We got a vacation home. And so we came back later on for the Christmas holidays, and we were sitting in our vacation home on the beach, not far from here, about 10 blocks south of us, and I was reading the Miami Herald. And I was reading a story, and it was on the front page of what was called the neighbors section of the Miami Herald. And there was a story about the city of Miami Beach looking to develop a major hotel, and they wanted an African-American developer. I'm saying, wow, okay, well, they wanted an African-American developer, why? And so I read further, and it was about, there was a tourism boycott that was here in the early 1990s where African-Americans actually nationwide, including the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the country, along with other organizations, including the many other groups, including the National Bar Association, had engaged in a long-term tourism boycott of Miami-Dade County because, in part, because African-Americans had not been included in the economic mainstream of the hospitality industry. And in addition, what prompted it is Nelson Mandela had come after being freed from prison for decades in South Africa. He had made a global tour, and he stopped in Cuba and then came here. And they'd given him the key to the city, but then there was a protest and some protesting from Cuban Americans who were upset that Mandela had come from Cuba and came here. So, now by the way, the city had given the key to the city to RoboCop, but the city leaders took their key from the city and took it from Mandela and rescinded the honor, and that triggered a boycott. So I read this article and I thought, okay, well, here's a great opportunity. And how many African-American developers are there in the United States? I knew a few, but there weren't that many. How many were large enough and sizable enough to develop a 400-plus room luxury hotel? I said probably fewer. And then how many were reading the Miami Herald today? Hopefully one, me. So I contacted the broker who found me and my wife our home, and I said, look, I want to go and look at this property. I want you to go to the city and get a copy of the request for proposals from the city who own this site, the Royal Palm Hotel, and I want to buy the hotel next door, so get me in that Tuesday. And so I went and saw the property on Tuesday and read the RFP, and my wife and I were flying back. I said, well, I'm going to buy the hotel next door. We're going to bid on the Royal Palm. We're going to win it, and it's going to change the trajectory of our company, and it's going to change our lives. And so you fast forward a few months later, and after a tough fight and a tough process, we were successful, and we won the development rights in June of 1995, we won the rights to develop the Royal Palm Hotel. And do we have it on the screen? There we go. Let's see here. There we go. So that's what became the Royal Palm Hotel in South Beach at 15th and Collins Avenue. So we won the rights there June 6th of 1996. And I remember it was an exciting day. And then, of course, that was hard work, but the real work began to build a hotel. And after some challenges, by the way, the historic landmark building that the city sold me when I started construction, was condemned by that very city government as an unsafe structure, and I had to tear it down. But it was a landmark building, and I had to get historic preservation approval to do that. So I had to go back through the permitting process, and I built an exact replica as a compromise so that I could go on with the project. So we opened the project in May of 2002, and it became the first major hotel in the United States to be developed and owned by an African-American developer. A surprise, by the way, because I thought our country had made greater progress, but that was a moment of time and progress for the city of Miami Beach, and from a tourism boycott to a major hotel. And while we opened the hotel, the NAACP held its national convention in Miami-Dade, and our hotel was one of the headquarter hotels. So it was able to turn the economic tide, which we'll talk about in a moment, for having economic inclusion. So that was 21 years ago, and much has changed in Miami, and much has changed in the country. So that gives me, so to fast forward, 6 years after I opened the Royal Palm, just a couple of miles up the street, I hosted then Senator Barack Obama at another barrier-breaking project of mine, the Bath Club. The Bath Club is about 10 blocks north of us. It was built in 1926 by Carl Fisher, and Herbert Hoover was a founding member, as well were the Cartiers, the Firestones, and so many others. It was considered the premier and most exclusive social club in the Southeast United States and had the who's who of American industry. And it was also a restricted club. Now you're probably wondering, some people are wondering, what does that mean? What is a restricted club? Well, that was my question when a social columnist called me in 1997 and asked me how did it feel to be the first black member of the most restricted club in Miami. So my response was, what in the world is a restricted club? I live in Washington, D.C. I've never heard of anything like that, and they've got lots of clubs here. And so she explained to me that it was a club that didn't allow blacks or Jews. And what she also told me is that the club once had a sign outside, and it said, no blacks, no Jews, no dogs. So here's a great American story for us, and this is the example of the greatness of our country. This first black member purchased the club 2 years later. And I developed a luxury condominium development project on the parking lot and on the tennis club court. And I named them residences at the Bath Club. I also designated the clubhouse as a historic landmark because I believe the best way to make sure our country doesn't repeat its mistakes of the past is to remember those mistakes of the past and every now and then be reminded of them so that we don't do them again. And so a few years ago, I relaunched the club, and it is once again now the most exclusive private beach club in South Florida, and our tagline now is, we are exclusively inclusive. So back to more recent history. A few months after we hosted Senator Barack Obama, he became America's first black president. 2008 was a time of great hope for all Americans. It was a time where America was incredibly optimistic that we were finally turning the page of racial disparity and ending the obstruction of economic progress for African Americans. Our country has made some progress since in the civil rights movement in terms of college education, and over the last 50 years, inclusion in terms of other economic measurements. But we have made not enough progress on economic inclusions. So sometimes America tends to take 2 steps forward and a half step backwards. Here's an example of that. Homeownership of black Americans has remained relatively unchanged since 1968 when Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act. 42% of black households owned their own home in 1970. Today, it's 44%. For white Americans, it's 72%. The gap of home ownership is 29%. At the peak of home ownership was not during the 8 years, though, when we had a black president. The peak was at 49.7% in 2004 when George W. Bush was president. It was essentially the same during President Obama's tenure as it was in 1968 when Dr. King was assassinated. 48% was the highest percentage during his presidency, and it fell to 44% when he left office. So income disparities are largely the same today as well. Our country has experienced economic progress at an unprecedented level and leads in global economic expansion, but not substantive, equitable, and economic inclusion. Even with these disparities, though, in 2019, Black Americans spent $109 billion in the U.S. travel industry alone. $109 billion. Black Americans represent 13% of U.S. travelers. Black Americans spend 13.1 nights per year in hotels alone and spend an average daily room rate of $600. Now, I just told you that the rate here, citywide, is $223. So Black travelers are a significant customer base of the luxury hotel industry, and Black customers are growing in terms of their presence in the luxury hotel sector, just like Black customers have been in the luxury goods sector and in luxury homes and in luxury automobiles. So it's important that the industry respond to this growing customer base. Right now, a large segment of Black travelers feel their hotel does not make them welcome. According to a recent survey, 42% of Black meeting travelers felt unwelcome in their hotels. Now think about that, that's astonishing. What hotel could ever stay in business if all of their customers, 42% of them, felt they were unwelcomed? No hotel could keep their doors open under those circumstances. What's happening, though, here in our industry is that we are overlooking a very strong customer base, and that the luxury sector is losing that customer base to other industries such as Airbnb, for example. If you look at the numbers of Airbnb, they are getting a disproportionate share of Black upscale and luxury customers. So my point is that there is a tremendous market that this industry has not capitalized on. And by the way, the Royal Palm with a 4.5-star hotel, I'm building a Mandarin Oriental in downtown LA. I'm building a 1 hotel in downtown LA. I am going to build in the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere across from the Jacob Javits Center at a cost of $3 billion. And it will have 2 hotels, a Six Sense hotel and a Regent hotel, both Intercontinental branded hotels. So I understand this business, and I know when I look at hotels to buy, when I look at numbers, I know that our industry loses a large customer base, and I know that the reason that my hotel, the Royal Palm, was the #1 performing hotel in the Intercontinental brand network that they managed. It was the Intercontinental Managed Hotel of the Year as well. And because I'm able to go and get 13%, and I'm getting a disproportionate share of the African American luxury traveler. I owned a Marriott hotel that every year I owned it for 20 years, it made more money than the Ritz-Carlton down the street from us. And it was a Courtyard by Marriott in downtown. It was between the #5 and #1 Courtyard on the planet for the 20 years I owned it. It was run by an African-American general manager. We had a significant group of diversity in terms of our employees. They all felt a part of our family. And our customer base came back time and time and time again. And we always participated in citywide initiatives and groups. So I can tell you firsthand that diversity is very good for business, and it will change the profit numbers in terms of hotel operations. And so how do you show your customer that they're welcome in your property? Well, inclusion sends a message to customers that they are valued and welcomed. So we see this with women. Women are the strongest demographic consumer of luxury hotels in terms of business travelers. Women tend to spend more money in luxury surroundings when they travel for business. The industry has responded to them. We see women in every aspect of hotel operations, but there's a place where we fall short in terms of addressing our female customers as well. But the biggest impediment to greater economic inclusion is ownership, because if we look around the country, there are very few luxury hotels owned by women or African Americans. And why is that? Well, the big impediment is access to capital. Hotels are real estate assets, and they're a business that operates real estate, and real estate's a capital-intensive business. And so those of us in the real estate industry have to rely upon not just bank financing, but we have to rely heavily on venture capital and private equity. So let me give you an example, for example. So right now, there is $82 trillion invested in venture capital and private equity. 82 trillion. Out of that, less than 2% of it is allocated to businesses run and owned by women and people of color combined. Black entrepreneurs get less than 0.5% of capital. Women get less than 1% of that capital. So what this tells you is that it is nearly impossible for us to see diversity in terms of ownership until we take a closer look of how capital is allocated. There's another little hidden secret in terms of capital allocation. Of that $82 trillion, the largest investor class of investing in these funds are public employee pension systems. Public employee pension systems are a majority women. They are disproportionately people of color. And so when it comes to allocating capital, women and people of color cannot even count on getting fair access to their own money. So that is the system that we operate and that we allow to operate. And so we have to change that, because it will be impossible for us to change the way our industries do business. So I was competing years ago for a project in San Francisco, and the editor of the San Francisco newspaper indicated that they were going to support our project because they wanted to see greater inclusion, and the editor said that ownership was power. And the editorial that they ran said ownership was the essence of power, and they were selecting us because I was going to own the hotel, and they felt more comfortable that I would be more sensitive to providing women and people of color economic opportunities. And they were right, we are. So we have to now think about how we bring about this change in allocation of capital. And when we do that, then that opens up the doors of other opportunity. And when we go after customers who are underserved, that helps us make the bottom line even better. Many of our citizens do not get fair access to the American dream. So my grandfather was a hotel doorman in Washington, D.C. at the Wardman Park Marriott Hotel. So he was there for 41 years. This industry was good to him in many ways. He was able to send 4 of his 5 daughters to college. They left without student debt. My grandmother died when my mother was a teenager. He was able to work flexible hours to be a parent and take care of his kids, work double shifts so he could earn money and be able to support them. And so for 41 years, though, he worked in an industry that is known for limitless opportunity, that you start off, it's actually encouraged to start off at the front door and then work your way up to running the hotel. The general manager for the majority of time at my Marriott that performed so well in D.C., he started off as an assistant front desk attendant. So the greatness of our country is that you fast forward 30 some odd years later, and about 1.5 miles away from the Wardman Park Marriott Hotel, I owned a Marriott as a hotel owner. So the country took my family from hotel doorman to hotel owner in 2 generations, and that's an amazing thing for America. So we have to have more of those opportunities. We have to provide more chances at upward mobility. But we have to do this. I think it's incumbent on all of us that we must take steps, take affirmative steps to make a difference. So my company, which has been in business for almost 40 years, we have historically done over 25% of all of our business with women-owned and minority-owned businesses. Today, we have a pipeline in development right now of about $8 billion, and 35% as a minimum threshold for all of our projects are to go to women-led and minority-owned businesses. We have hired a women-led and women-owned general contractor, the largest and oldest one in the country, to build what we call the Affirmation Tower, the $3 billion project in New York City. And so we take these steps and we do what we call affirmative development. And it's a tagline that's copywritten. My wife came up with that to describe who we are as a company, because I feel that as a company, we need to be more than just a business that makes money. Our capitalistic democracy is resting on the pillars of capitalism. And capitalism must be fair. And if capitalism is not fair and equitable, then it will put our democracy at risk. And we're seeing a lot of that push over these last 3 years, the fight for racial justice, the fight for economic inclusion, the visceral politics that we're seeing. More and more Americans, regardless of race or gender, feel like the American dream is no longer accessible to them. And in many instances, they are correct. The system is now at a point where it is less fair. So we can do one of two things. We can either sit on our hands and do nothing, which perpetuates it, or we can say that we're going to do what's good for our country, good for our fellow citizens, and good for our fellow human being, and provide an environment of opportunity, because the American dream isn't owned by one person, it's not owned by an institution, it's our dream. It's our dream, and it evolves, and it's a dream that we've made possible, and that our parents and those who came before us made possible, but entrusted it to us to make it better and make it a more perfect nation, as our founding fathers anticipated us doing. And so we have to take some responsibility. And our industry, one that is known for low barriers to entry and limitless opportunity, has to step up and do its part. And that will be good for business. And so I want to leave you all with a challenge of all of us doing our part by either adopting someone and mentoring them in their careers, by giving somebody a chance at a contracting opportunity that wouldn't have gotten it, to practice the theory of relativity, where the contractor, like I hired, had never done anything of $3 billion. There are not that many buildings of that size, but they've done hundreds of millions. And so I felt she's done that successfully for several decades. Certainly she'd be able to do our building and scale it up. But to practice the theory of relativity, but to provide environments of opportunity, and be willing to come into audiences like I am. This is clearly wasn't on your hierarchy of list of what to expect from me, but for you to hear a different perspective. And I think that all of us talking to each other about that, those of us who have daughters, what kind of life do we want for our daughter? What kind of future do we want for our daughters? What kind of future do we want for the next generation? And so we have to challenge ourselves to do that. And so, you know, President Obama, who became a very good friend, had a quote that he used very often. It was about change. And while our country's great, it needs to be improved, and we need to make some changes, and we need to make some changes in our industry. And so President Obama would often say that change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We're the ones we've been waiting for, and we're the change that we seek. And so let's all be about change in our industry and make it the environment of continued opportunity that it always has been. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
First of all, congratulations for everything that you've done. Thank you. What does your capital stack look like? When you're, doing your projects, are you, 90% hedge funds? Are you using family offices? How are you aggregating your capital to be able to do the projects that you're doing?
It's a very interesting thing. When I started off as a developer, I spent 90% of my time looking for a deal, looking for an opportunity. And then when we really got going, I was spending about 70% looking for deals. I spend now about 70% looking for money. The scale of the business has grown so much, and the capital, the disparity that I told you about affects me every day too. And so we get our capital from different places, but by and large, our capital stack generally is, if we do, a typical project for us is between a $500 million and $1 billion, and it'll be a mixed use that'll include either residential and some commercial use, but a hospitality component and more than half of them. And so what we look at is, if it's a $500 million, then 60% or $300 million is going to come from senior debt, and then we're going to look for the $200 million, and that's going to come from private equity or venture capital. And we're going to end up putting in between 10 and 20% of that, so between 20 and $40 million. We are now beginning we're in the market right now doing what's called a Series 144A, which is kind of like a private placement for the next step of maybe going public for our public-private business. And that is to help us in the embryonic stages to be able to do more deals by using capital there. But the challenge has been, so the capital stack is generally that way. With the private equity, we rely very heavily on private equity.
So are you going directly to sovereign wealth funds and going on a road show to actually get them, pitching them to?
We have been pitching, I do it almost, 3 to 4 times a week. And we're going to retailers, and we're actually looking to democratize capital as well. And one thing that we want to do is go to the individual investor and give them an opportunity to invest, because right now private equity, most of the time the net worth has to be at least $10 million, and they're investing in funds. They don't get to pick the real estate that they're investing in. They're picking a strategy and a manager as opposed to the real estate. And so we're looking to ultimately go to the consumer to allow them to directly invest in some of our developments.
Thank you so much.